Let's talk Tanya for the 29th of Kislev. Today's Tanya is actually quite unique, and the reason is the Jewish calendar, we have 12 months, and every single month is either 29 days or 30 days. And most of the months, it's predetermined. You know that this particular month, it's automatically will be either 29 days or 30 days. But there are 2 months of the year that are an exception to this. And depending on different calculations, sometimes there'll be 29 days, sometimes there'll be 30 days. So this month, Kislev, sometimes it's 29, sometimes it's 30. This year, there's only 29 days of Kislev. And therefore, in today's Tanya, we learn the section for the 29th and also the section for the 30th, because there is no 30th of Kislev this year. And why is that so interesting is because the Tanya for today encompasses the end of one chapter, of chapter 4, the beginning of another chapter, chapter 5, and there is no other daily segment of Tanya anywhere which encompasses part of one chapter and then part of another chapter. So, in yesterday's Tanya, we spoke about how our connection to Hashem is only through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. And we can have feelings for Hashem from today till tomorrow. We can love Hashem and be in absolute awe and reverence of Hashem, but those don't actually create a connection with Hashem. Connection to Hashem is through the tools that He gave us to connect to Him, which is Torah and mitzvahs, which we are able to fulfill using our thoughts, speech, and action. And that's what Torah really is all about. That's what Judaism is all about, is thought, speech, and action. Which raises the question then, okay, so are my feelings relevant at all? If my feelings don't create a connection with God, if I only connect to God through the thought, speech, and action of Torah, do my feelings have any relevance at all? And in today's Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says, yes, your feelings are important. Why are your feelings important? Because, yes, we connect to God through our garments. But think about that for a second. If we're connecting to God through our garments, so I'm doing a mitzvah with my hands. I'm giving charity. I'm putting up a mezuzah. My hands are connecting to God. My faculty of action is connecting to God. But how about me? How about me? Who am I? As we mentioned, I am my thoughts, my feelings, my perspectives. Are they connected to God? Or do they remain outside of this connection? So if I do have feelings for God, I love God, and I have awe for God, and my love for God causes me to do the mitzvahs and to study Torah, and the fact that I have awe for God, that causes me to abstain from doing anything which God doesn't want me to. So then what happens is these feelings become invested in the mitzvah. So now the mitzvah connects to God, it creates the connection with God. But because my feelings, I'm inside the mitzvahs, so therefore the entirety of me now is caught up in this connection with God. With this, the Alter Rebbe concludes chapter 4. And with this, we've concluded a very important part of Tanya, because we've been studying about the godly soul up until this point, and we learned about the substance of the godly soul. That was in chapter 2. The substance of the godly soul is godliness. We learned about the core components and structure of the godly soul, which is the 10 faculties, intellectual and emotional. That was chapter 3. And then in this chapter, which we just finished, chapter 4, the Alter Rebbe talks about the agenda of the godly soul, which is connected to the garments of the godly soul, because the agenda of the godly soul is to connect to God, which can only happen through the garments, through thought, speech, and action. Now we start chapter 5, and the Alter Rebbe says, yes, the agenda of the soul is Torah and mitzvahs, and to connect to God through Torah and mitzvahs. However, there's a major advantage to studying Torah over doing mitzvahs, which is why the ultimate agenda of the godly soul is studying Torah even more so than doing mitzvahs. And why is that? Because when we study Torah, at this moment, we are connecting to God, because Torah is God's wisdom, and God and His wisdom are one and the same. So when I process and understand a Torah idea in my mind, I'm processing and understanding and connecting with God Himself. And that's why the importance of Torah is far beyond, people think Torah is a guide to life. And that's true, Torah is a guide for our life. But there's another aspect in Torah which is so much deeper than that. In terms of the role that it plays in our relationship with God. I could be studying a halacha, which I can't say it's a guide in my life, because it's practically irrelevant. It's irrelevant to me, and might even be irrelevant to the larger world. We have halacha of if one party comes to the rabbinical court and says this is a certain argument, and this is countered by the defendant who comes to court and says something else. And then what is the halacha? The halacha is as follows: If I learned that halacha now, chances are it never happened. It might never happen that party A will come to court with that argument and party B will counter in that way. But that's not what's important. That's not what's relevant. What's relevant is that God's wisdom and will dictated what the halacha should be in this case. And when I learned that halacha and I understand that, so my mind right now, I am absolutely connecting with God's wisdom and will, which is why Jews study Torah. In other cultures, the academic study, the scholar study. And if someone, the simple person, the lay person wants to know, has a question, they go to the academic and they ask the question. In the Jewish tradition, everyone studies Torah. Not only the rabbis, not only the scholars. Because Torah is not only about being a guide to life and knowing what to do, in which case you can presumably have someone tell you what to do. But it's about connecting with God in the deepest and most profound way. And this is something that every single one of us wants to do. Now, this is what happens when we study Torah. How does that compare to what happens when we do a mitzvah? Because we know doing a mitzvah is also part of the godly soul agenda. It also creates a unity with God. How does that compare to studying Torah? That we'll find out, God willing, in tomorrow's Tanya.